The Ivory Ape, Cullen, is a Jaws-esque film featuring Jack Palance, where he is tasked with hunting a titular ivory ape. And there is a scene where Jack Palance, in a Richard Shaw-style monologue from Jaws, admits to shooting his son, who is being dragged off by a crocodile, into the water.
I feel like I should see this. I'm looking up the director now.
You should not see it. It is not good.
It's not?
That is the best part of the movie, is that scene that I just described to you. It's like 2 minutes long. Also, It doesn't help that the version of the movie is on YouTube with Dutch burned-in subtitles.
And the Dutch get everything.
But to Richard's point, it's a very bad VHS. But on this episode of Culture Cast, we're not talking about a bad burned-in Dutch subtitled film. We're talking about a movie you can readily find on Amazon Prime for free, because I guarantee you probably have an Amazon account. If you don't have Facebook, you probably have Amazon, because you don't like to leave your house and buy things at the store. You like getting things to your house. On this episode, we're going to be talking about 2016's The Handmaiden, and I'm joined by my two good friends. You know him as Big Western Sizzlin', all the way from DC's Titans, an EP over there doing real things in the movie industry, film industry, television industry, Mr. Richard Hatem.
Hello, Chris. I'm white, I'm straight, and I'm here to talk about The Handmaiden.
And also joining us all the way from Pulp-Serenade, your friend and mine, Mr. Cullen Gallagher.
I think Richard summed me up as well, but very, very, very happy to be here as well.
I like
Thank you for having me.
Richard hit the nail right on the head, folks. So we're going to be talking about 2016's The Handmaiden, not to be confused with a show that all of a sudden is, once again, a lot more topical than it has any reason or right to be. The Handmaiden's Tale. No, we're talking about 2016's The Handmaiden. So the film is directed by Park-chan-wook, and it stars Min-hee and Tae-ri as two women who are being manipulated by men in their lives.
This movie is not relevant at all today.
Right? This film, also not relevant. And there's a lot going on. Right, Richard?
There's a lot going on. Let's, in this case, let's set the full context. You've described the movie. It's based on a book called Fingersmith, written by
Sarah Waters. And it's set in Victorian era Britain, and they transposed it onto Japanese occupied Korea, which for a lot of us who don't know about Japanese occupied Korea, it actually makes a lot of sense that they transposed it because it looks the same, which is really smart, obviously.
Yeah. But and what year did that book come out? It's not
like 2002. So it's fairly recent, but that was 20 years ago.
Right. But still written within the modern era. It was not written it's not a Patricia Highsmith novel written in the 40s or something. Okay. So this is a modern story, both in book and a modern film,
right?
In terms about an era in the past in both cases.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's important because the subject matter is once you get into it, overtly sexual on the one hand, and then also talks about, pretty serious sexual dysfunction on the other. So part of the modern interest in this story is imagining, I think, what we consider fairly modern things, because they're talked about in the open so much now, but in but in a not so distant past time frame, which in this movie, the time frame of the movie is what?
Between 1910 and 1945.
Okay.
Yeah, and I feel like they don't mention World War II, so it's got to be
Like so it's in between
20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
but it seems older in a lot of ways because they're so isolated in this house. It feels like a lot of the story feels like it could have taken place in the 1800s because of, again, also the treatment of the characters in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it is very much about these old traditions,
right?
Or things that, in quote, have become traditions, and people that are breaking out of those, proverbial chains.
Yes. And look, you'll find that I am speaking as if I am stepping out onto a minefield or across a tightrope.
Right.
And I'd like to go ahead and acknowledge that the three of us had a brief conversation before we started recording about how, hopefully ironic at best and, inappropriate at worst it is that it's the three of us discussing this movie. But once you sort of accept that, okay, there are no Asian people on the podcast, and there are no women on the podcast, and there, for the most part, are straight guys on the podcast, we would still like to bring our thoughts and opinions to this as serious film watchers and serious film, enjoyers, and see if we can't talk about it in a way that might interest the listener and encourage them to check out the movie and see what their feelings are. And then, of course, respond back to us, because this show, of course, can be, talked about on Facebook and Twitter. And, if you hear something you like, let us know. And if you hear something you don't like, let us know too. We're doing our best here. That being said, I'll just toss right down that I enjoyed the movie very much and thought it was, and I'm new to the filmmakers and to the stars of the film, found it to be just so visually beautiful. Every frame was just, it just draws you in. The color, the composition. Sometimes I'm a little worried when a movie has subtitles, because I'm like, I'm going to miss out on the visuals. And here, I think they were balanced in such a way that I was able to really take in the visual information and still get the story.
Like you said, it's important, Richard. It is important to get that out of the way, especially with something like this. This is for as much fun as this movie is, it's a lot of fun. There are fun parts. This movie has a fair amount of comedy in it and a fair amount of like lightheartedness, even though it's pretty serious. It is a movie about women being taken advantage of, women being treated poorly. What a surprise. Look outside and see it going on. It's the reality of the way things were. And I'm glad that this film takes it to task. And like you said, Richard, this is a modern story with contemporary ideas and a contemporary author setting it in a time where people were writing these kinds of stories, but they were having to use a lot of coded language. You couldn't write openly gay, right? Like there, I mean, there's all kinds of things where it's like, this was a gay character. It was coded that way. And it's like, yeah, but they don't have to do that anymore.
And I also,
but that's to me, that's why it was important that you mentioned that. Cause it's like, they can be open about the characters being gay. They don't have to hide it, even though they're setting it in Victorian, with the original stories, Victorian England.
And by the way, that's part of what draws a modern audience in, the feeling that we're watching a period piece in a new way, where more layers are being stripped away from a culture that was more modest than our own. And one of the titillating factors of a movie like this is, maybe they weren't so different than us. And maybe there were more layers between those feelings and those desires and those actions and how people comported themselves in daily life and in daily social interaction. But we're all the same, driven by the same things today as yesterday, down into time immemorial.
I think it's also worth pointing out that there's a meta aspect of the movie, because it is very much about representation of gender and sexuality and who, an in quote intended audience was for this material at the time. Because, one of the main characters, the uncle, is manufacturing facsimiles of pornography and, basically forcing these women to read this. And the representation of sexuality
forcing
is
his
purely
family to read it.
Yes.
Let's make that distinction, because that's the really fucked up part.
It's the familial relations are just deeply disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
And the representation is purely for the, it's exploitive of women and sexuality for the amusement of rich men. That is what sexuality is represented in the books within this movie. And I think that is very much something that, the film is commenting on. Because the film in and of itself, sort of challenges those notions.
So you're saying that the presupposition of the characters within this drama is that pornography is something for men to enjoy.
Right.
That's the way it's presented in this movie.
Right.
You see the men
literally presented verbally to them, which is just so that in and of itself is perverse, right? I mean, that in and of itself is perverse.
I mean, there's also that moment when I guess it would have been the mother and the daughter are giggling over, the word penis and vagina. And then the uncle character comes over and smothers their faces.
Yeah.
I don't quite understand the moment, but there seems to be, it's just he doesn't want them to have any sort of reading. Everything is, he is controlling. These words are supposed to be delivered in this manner for this purpose, for this audience.
But another way to look at that is that just occurred to me is he is infuriated that they are taking any sort of pleasure.
That's a really good way of putting it, Richard. Yeah.
Yeah.
And because it's clearly threatening to him. This is something that he controls. Now, for those of you who have not seen the movie, I'll give you a bit more information about the narrative. So there's a character of the uncle, and he owns this really, vast estate. And in Japanese occupied Korea. So this uncle who is wealthy, he has this extensive book collection. He also has a gold mine in his possession that was given to him, I believe, he was allowed to profit from by the Japanese because he went along with their occupation and was a, co-conspirator in that way. So he has remained wealthy. And what he does is he's got this vast collection of books. You sort of feel like most of it's pornography. And he hosts these readings. So, 6 or 10 wealthy men in tuxedos will come to the house, into the library, and then selections from these books will be read to them by his niece. And it's all very, obviously you can picture it's not raucous. She's sitting, so almost on a stage reading these selections. These men are listening. They're becoming, and for better or worse, this is one of the more amusing parts of the film. They're becoming visibly, physically aroused, unsettled,
agitated,
crossing their legs as these passages become more and more steamy. Now, of course, and again, these steamy passages to our modern ears are fairly tame, even though we know that they're talking about sexual intercourse, but it's not vulgar. It's in very sort of elevated language. And yet for the time, you realize this is as dirty as it gets.
Dream of the Fisherman's Wife is still pretty tawdry, Richard. An octopus sucking on a woman's vagina is pretty tawdry even now. I mean...
And we got to talk about that damn octopus. I mean, I'm sure people have written papers about the octopus.
They sure have. Boy, there's a tank of octopi in this movie.
Yeah, I know. That was really disturbing.
Yes, it was.
And we'll talk about that in a second. But I'll go on to say that so then the uncle then sells these books and makes money. So he is a pornographer, and then we find out it's even for him it's even more base than that, because he has hired someone, the count, to actually forge these books. So in other words, to make copies of them and sell them as if they're originals. So now he's not even selling legitimate works of erotic art. he's selling copies as if they're original. So he's a counterfeiter as well as a pornographer, as well as a sycophant to the occupying forces. So, and that's the least of it. He's also a sexual predator.
Yes.
To his own family and his niece.
And he's also a sociopath, because towards the end of the film, he says something to the effect of, when you're hearing her talk and you're imagining it in your head, everybody's imagining something different. And that's what I get off on, is watching other people like imagining what she's reading. And like, that's what he said he gets off on. It's like one of the things he gets off on is like seeing other people being agitated in this state of like sexual arousal. It's super strange.
So let's talk about that for a second. So this was, these scenes at their, inception in the novel were written by a woman. And this is a woman writing an older male character who is, he is nothing else except sadistic, predatory. He is a pedophile. He is a torturer.
Sadomasochist.
So in our drama, what does he represent? Is he sort of the furthest? He clearly represents a kind of male attitude. And my question is, do all women somewhere in their mind carry an archetype of a man like this, who exists out there, either in their own life or just on the outskirts, that is sort of the worst of the male species?
I have beliefs of my own about people like that, so I can't imagine we all don't have those constructs in our head, whether or not there's a specific one for that kind of man. Again, these kinds of people in our world this bad are like very small percentages. Just generally terrible people is probably, yes. This terrible, like this is a nightmare scenario. This is like the 11 of 10. Like you're worse than the worst. This is so bad. I would hope to God nobody this bad actually exists. I'm sure they do, but I hope it's a low
Jeffrey
percentage.
Epstein.
Right. But like it's a small number of people compared to the grand population.
So what was interesting is that in the voice of this movie, and again, I haven't read the novel, but in the voice of the movie and in the performance of this role, there was this strange level of humor.
Right.
This performance was I would say over the top. I would say it's probably the biggest performance, but not in a way that demands revulsion. There's a weird sort of like Gollum sort of hand-wringing perversion and such weirdly overt pre-adolescent excitement he exhibits that it's interesting to me that they went in that direction, that they, I guess, trusted the audience to know this guy's horrible. And maybe they felt that this kind of performance at least gave it a level of dimension or reality. So it wasn't just completely like you couldn't even look at the guy.
We also forgot to mention that he's a murderer.
Right. Also a murderer, because he murders the aunt because she was getting sick and tired of reading the stories.
The guy keeps getting worse the more you find out about him, until the very end.
Yeah, by the end of it, you're just like, okay, well, he's about to cut this dude's dick off.
But Richard, you're right in that it's a really interesting sort of figure because he is super symbolic. He represents nothing but the worst and not unrealistic aspects of this toxic masculinity and misogyny. And yet he is delivered with a weird sense of almost like macabre humor. It's off-putting, it's offsetting. It's a movie, and this is something we haven't talked about yet, because we're discussing the movie almost in chronological order. It is not delivered in chronological order whatsoever. And I think it is a movie that, really deserves to be seen a second time so you can see how it's set up once you figure everything out. But that the way we're talking about this character, it's like you don't know where you stand in this world literally until you have all the facts. And then you have this guy and it's, you're scared of him, you're revolted by him. He has this sort of commanding power over the female characters. It's the whole movie. It's just, it's very, puts you, off kilter.
Can you describe the part 1, part 2, part 3 structure?
I'll do my best, since you're a professional writer. I was hoping you could help out. But to anyone who hasn't seen this movie, it actually begins almost sort of like a Dickensian, with a little bit like sort of tale with a little bit of Vertigo and Diabolique elements. And I mentioned that because I know, at least according to Wikipedia, Park Chan-wook, the director, was influenced by Vertigo to become a filmmaker. And there were some elements from both Diabolique and Vertigo were based on works by the same French writers. So I think there's some elements of that he brings. Anyway, it begins from Suki. Am I pronouncing that correctly? She plays the handmaiden. She's like an orphan. She sort of belongs to this family of thieves where children are brought up to be pickpockets. And then this man who is pretending to be a count, enters and wants to hire her to become the handmaiden to this young woman who has, is going to inherit all this great wealth. And this is the woman who reads the pornography.
Lady Hideko, which I want to ask a question before we continue. It's intentional that the uncle's name is Kozoki, Fujiwara, and it's like I'm trying to figure out what the significance of some names being Japanese and some names being Korean is, because there is something there as well. I'm assuming I'm trying to kind of figure out what it might be. Again, my cultural lackings are where this comes in. I'm assuming, let's just go out on a limb here, Koreans didn't appreciate being occupied by Japanese. Most occupied countries don't.
But it feels like some of them adopted Japanese names.
Right, which is because Kozoki is not Korean. That is Japanese. Right. But then you have Suki, which is very clearly Korean.
Yeah.
Well, we have a modern example in your other podcast in Barney Miller. Jack Sue was a Japanese American interned in the camps in California during World War II, who changed his name to Jack Sue, which would be a Chinese name, so that he would not necessarily be associated with the Japanese, so that he could continue to work. And the irony, of course, being that he was often asked to play the role of a Japanese person. So you'd have Jack Sue, who was Japanese, portraying a Japanese person, but it would look as if a Chinese person was doing it. And that was always a bit of a source of conflict for him. But I guess all of which is to say, you do what you have to do in wartime.
Right. Which I understand. Like wartime is all rules are out the window, which again, like that's kind of where you can get away with some of the things that are going on here are not okay, but like shit's real bad right now because our entire world has been upended. So in part 1, what we're seeing, and we are told very explicitly what we're seeing a con game play out.
And it's from Suki's perspective.
From Suki's perspective.
Which I didn't mention earlier, which is very key.
Yes, and that is very key because we're only getting a slice of the information. And now in part 2, we'll see many of the same scenes, but with more information from other people's points of view, which again makes it an incredibly enjoyable mystery and a very involving narrative. But in part 1, we're watching a young woman go in to be the handmaiden to this heiress. And the con game is this. Count Fujiwara will come in and court the heiress with the aim of marrying her, thereby gaining her wealth. And then the plan is that Hideko, the heiress, will then be carted off to a mental asylum, and then the count and the young handmaiden who are working together will split the money. Okay, so the handmaiden's job is to sort of be a confidant to Lady Hideko, and to talk to her about this man who's courting her and to encourage her to fall in love. And so we understand that, and that's laid out very clearly in the beginning. The plan is told to us as it is told to the characters. So everyone's starting with the same information, which is great.
Yep.
Thank God. For a guy watching a foreign language film, I was really, really happy. They were super clear. So, but what makes the first hour interesting is that we see something else happening. We actually see Suki and Lady Hideko begin to form a relationship that begins as an emotional relationship and then becomes a sexual relationship and an actual romantic love relationship. So now throughout part one, we're wondering, well, how does this compromise the plan? Because if Suki is in love with this woman, is she going to go through with betraying her? And then something very interesting happens at the end of part one. What is that?
Which we're going to spoil.
Right. So just a heads up, spoilers.
Because we have to, because we're talking about the movie. So sorry.
So it turns out that the lady actually gets Suki committed to the asylum in her place. In her stead, as they would say.
So at this moment, at the end of part one, the audience is like, what? And we're very surprised. We've only seen the story from Suki's point of view. So we're horrified at what we've now seen is a double betrayal.
Right.
First, because Suki does go through with the original plan, but it gets turned around on her. So now we're like, oh, okay. So everyone's backstabbing everyone, and we're feeling kind of bad, but we know we're only halfway through the movie, so more to come. Part two begins, and it takes up the story in a different way.
Yeah, and so we have like a flashback. Essentially, most of the second act is the past, things we've already seen or things we never saw because we were taking place after we saw them.
But now it's from Lady Hideko's perspective,
right? It's even narrated by her. Yeah. Which I think that kind of dual story really works in this case, because the way the act one ends is such a gut punch that they almost just keep going without addressing it. They're like, we'll get back to it, but we need you to understand what happens when we get back to it.
Well, because emotionally, if you had to articulate your feelings at the end of part one, it would be you're staring at Lady Hideko going, how could she do this? And it's almost as you're going, who is she anyway? That the story then tells you who she is and how she got to this moment, not just by going back to the beginning when, this little con game started, but going all the way back to her childhood. And here's where the uncle really comes in. And here's where we see the real ugliness and horror in the story of her upbringing.
Grooming her since she was a child to read these like horrifyingly sexual stories that no child should be reading for any adults, regardless of their age. I mean, she's not reading it for the room until she gets old enough, but still.
That's how she's taught to read. Right. Is by reading these and out loud and at a certain pacing, because the words have to be spoken in a certain way.
Right.
Right. So it's horrifying.
And then I guess it would be her mother is, eventually tries to leave, and at least Hideko knows, sees her body hanging from a noose. She later reads in a book that if you are hanged, there are going to be signs on your body that this is how you died. And she confronts the uncle, and the uncle, it's then intimated that he murdered her and then sort of staged this death. And there's this, well, I feel like that's what's sort of hanging over her. Like, why doesn't she leave? There is this actual physical threat that if she defies this man, she too will be murdered.
Right. And she'll be, and I didn't put it together until, again, we started talking about it, that her mother, the uncle's wife, was killed by the octopus. She was strangled, I believe, suffocated by the octopus earlier, and then her corpse was cleaned, dressed, and hung in the tree. I think that's the clear implication, that there's something in the basement I need to show you, but we never see it until the very, very end. And when we see it, it is horrifying. Now, it's never explained, but now I realize that must be what they expected us to take from this.
Which is kind of what I thought too when I saw what the fuck was what. So at the end of the film, the Count gets kidnapped back because he finds out, you're full of shit. You're a con man. All right.
We're skipping way ahead.
But to bring this thing up with the octopus.
We'll go back.
Okay.
We'll go back. The thing with the octopus, I don't know what to say. It's just a giant glass box with an octopus roiling around in it, but it's not one octopus. It looks like a big one or a bunch.
I thought it was one giant octopus.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I just assumed it was a bunch because there are no octopus that big. I was using real life expectations. I guess I shouldn't have, to be fair.
Look, if we all go back to sophomore English, everything is a symbol.
It's fair.
And if this octopus is the thing that this most deadly of all characters keeps in his basement. I mean, look, if it was a James Bond movie, then the octopus is an octopus and it's what, Dr. No uses to torture people. Got it.
Right.
But in this case, then, for my final, the question I'll choose to answer is, how does an octopus represent voracious, rapacious male sexual appetite?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of
there's a lot there. Yeah, and a whole lot of arms too,
and a lot of juices that spit out and fluids and the
motion of suctioning and the arms wrapping around you and holding you down and not allowing you to move. Yeah.
Early on in this portion of the movie, when she's a little girl, she's brought into her sleeping quarters. And the other creepy character, the woman who is sort of the head, housekeeper, tells her you're not allowed to have a light in the room, and you'd better not cry or make noise, because right outside that door is an ogre. He's a giant, and if he hears you, he'll come in and he'll lay on you and smother you. And yet, even another version of, sort of bodily control and smothering.
Constant bodily control. Constant. I mean, again, that is the thing about a movie like this that I do appreciate, is the message is rather boilerplate. This is a very common message to go back to in these kinds of stories, is an austere society where women are unable to be themselves, feel themselves, however you want to look at it. It's all the same. It's all the truth. And I appreciate a kind of contemporary look at it, but still really leaning on our expectations, but at the same time, clearly subverting them. I mean, there is a lot of that in this film as well.
So in this second section, we then move forward in time so that we do cover the events of part one. Only now we're getting more information. We're getting it from Hideko's point of view. So we're seeing certain scenes replay. Only now we're hearing what the Count is saying, and we're seeing the Count attempting to seduce her, but she's not responding. And I think this tracks with the level of abuse she's been through. She's not really going to respond to a traditional romantic suitor. She's been too heavily traumatized, and she can sense on some level that this guy means her harm. So on no level is she falling for this.
Well, and all the men that she's ever interacted with in her entire life are predators, just like her uncle. And that's the other thing. I mean, outside of, we never get to see her interact with any other male characters other than her uncle, and then the men that her uncle brings, one of which happens to be the Count, whose name we never learn. But he's one of this group of rich men who are coming to listen to these stories. Are they getting whipped on the ass? Or are they imagining themselves being whipped on the ass?
I think they're imagining.
Okay, that was my reading of the scene. They were cutting to them and they were imagining them being in that position, which I thought was a really interesting, great way of presenting that scene. Because again, it further reinforces this idea of what the uncle talks about at the end of the movie, where he likes seeing other people getting agitated and aroused. And then the movie is showing you the interior thoughts of these characters very quickly in that scene. And I appreciated that. I thought this was, again, a really interesting stylistic way of kind of allowing us to see in these characters' heads, even for a split second.
And one of the most important parts of part 2 is that the Count, sort of, and Hideko make a plan whereby they will get married and she will be able to get her fortune. They will hire somebody to take her place and put that person in a mental institution. And then she will take the other person's identity, take her portion of the money, and be free.
Right.
Free.
In quotes, yes. Lots of air quotes over that entire plan.
Yeah.
Well, you do. And of course, one thing I do want to say before I forget is that the actor who plays the Count, fantastic. And another really smart decision, I think, on the part of the filmmakers, because this guy, I mean, of course, compared to the uncle, is not so bad, but he's not a good guy, but he's played with such charm and humor. It's sort of the Brad Pitt, Harrison Ford, Paul Newman, you just enjoy watching this guy, and he's not a good guy, but when there are many moments you laugh with him, you totally are understanding where he is at every point in his story.
But there's a class thing too about him that's different from the uncle, because he came from the lower class, because he tells a story about how he would work all week and then go to this fancy restaurant and spend it on one meal. So for him, this is sort of a class of vengeance, oh, I can get my revenge and I can get my money. I can fool this guy.
Right.
And it's also sick the way he doesn't seem to, care at all that he's going to be exploiting these women and putting one of them, in an institution and stealing the other one's money. He just sees himself as oh, I came up with this great plan. I am the He-Man. I'm the hero of this story.
And like you mentioned, Richard, I think he picks his name as Fujiwara to further convince the uncle that he's on the up and up, because again, that's a Japanese name. You said, the uncle is this kind of Japanophile who buys in and kind of trades his soul for a gold mine. And what's the guy's name? Count Fujiwara. It's Japanese. And again, I wonder if the Count's character, do you think he's actually Japanese? No, he's Korean, right?
I think that's the whole
He's a Korean guy, right? Putting one over on an asshole who is a Japanophile, right, selling out his own country people. So again, like you said, the Count has a level of sympathy and empathy to the character, I think, just at its core. Even without the performance, the way he's written is such an interesting kind of, like Cullen said, a class thing and a kind of cultural aspect to it as well.
He's playing out a certain narrative where he is in command, and he is the hero of his story, and that he has plenty of his own blind spots and misogyny that he is completely unaware of.
Right. Well, I mean, it's okay, he's less of a bad guy because he just cares about money. He's not a rapist, murderer, pedophile. So suddenly he's a good guy in our narrative. Sliding scale.
On the scale of bad things, he's closer to the center. I mean, he's still a terrible.
So we see. So what we then see in part 2 is a real relationship. I think we're relieved to go, oh, so Hideko had other things going on, but ultimately she was emotionally connected. She was not faking her passion, in other words, for.
But that's an interesting flip side, because the first part we're watching Suki, and it's just she's pretending to be this handmaiden, but she's at the same time having these real feelings. So there's two narratives happening at the same time. And then in part 2, it's reversed, where we realize, Hideko is also acting because she's trying to lure Suki, but she's still having these real feelings. So you have these multiple narratives, these fake stories happening at the same time. There's something real going on underneath.
So then to step back and go, okay, so now, all right, now we're back in our English class. So what are we really saying here? We're telling a story about two women whose real feelings, in this case, they happen to be sexual and romantic, must be hidden as they participate in a sort of surface level charade of going along with a male-driven narrative clearly a male plan about how everything's going to work right now in this world, as directed by men. But beneath the surface is a very genuine love affair going on between these two women. And to a modern audience, I believe that the tension of the film, you find yourself really on the side of that, because it feels like the only genuine thing happening with anyone in the movie is that relationship. And you find yourself hoping that somehow it is real and it will find a way to exist in this world.
And I just want to interject. I agree with everything you say. And I love the fact that the moment that these two characters open up and express who they really are to each other is in like the weirdest kind of macabre, but also funny scene where Hideko tries to hang herself because she doesn't want to go through with this plan anymore. And then Suki's there to save her. And they both confess these plots. And then Suki, who's propping up Hideko's feet so she doesn't hang, lets it go. And it's like, this fucking guy. And then Hideko's like flailing and like choking, and she has to like run back to pick her up. How, with these emotions you're talking about, how charged they are, how sincere, how real, how revolutionary they are told in this like failed suicide turned like slapstick joke. That's a fucking weird as hell scene, and it works.
It's so great. And it reminds me in a weird way of Bollywood movies that just sort of do every genre and every tone all at once, 1 minute to the next. It's a musical, it's a comedy, it's a tragedy, it's a romance. And which is not the American idiom. The American idiom is select your tone, motherfucker, and stick to it.
Because if it's not one thing, we're angry.
Yeah, it's like this movie is a drama, and maybe there'll be a couple of giggles at some point, but not really. But here, it's so overtly the filmmaker in so many instances saying, we know we're being funny right now. We're totally aware of what we're doing. And that's so freeing and really allows you to participate in a movie, again, that otherwise might be hard to participate in because some of the characters are so vile.
Well, and I think, the more I think about tonal inconsistencies in movies, I think the other thing that people have a hard time wrapping their head around is tonal inconsistencies, I think, speak more to a naturalistic way of doing things, because life isn't.
Yes.
Right. And that's the way I view it. Like, it is hard to kind of internalize that, but we have to internalize that every day in our lives, because there are moments of happiness and sadness and all kinds of things throughout the day. And so when we see it in movies, I appreciate why it is harder, but at the same time, it theoretically shouldn't be that big of a deal.
Well, it's allowed in genre. Genre seems to
almost exclusively.
Genre seems, especially like in America, the action genre seems to understand, well, then you need a well-placed laugh and horror too, to reduce the audience tension. And because you can only build it up so much before it's okay, now we need to take a breath. Okay, now that we're all back down on the ground, now we can start turning it up and up and up again, and then let it go again. And so, so that kind of pacing is allowed, but typically in what is a self-professed drama or period piece, there's, in a Merchant Ivory movie, there's not a ton of variance in tone. Do you guys know what I'm talking about when I say Merchant Ivory, right?
Yeah, I've actually not seen any, but I know about the two of them.
Yeah, these were British producers who made movies based on classic novels. It was like, Passage to India and Remains of the Day. And, whenever you wanted to go to that world, it was typically a Merchant Ivory film. This is back in the 80s. Anyway.
Well, but to your point, Richard, like, there is a feeling in this movie of it being, like you said, Bollywood-esque, in that I feel like by the end of this movie, I have taken a journey with 4 entirely formed characters. I don't need any more in this movie. The journey that I have gone on with these characters, the ending makes sense. The way they get there makes sense in the story that they've told. It all narratively tracks. Is it tonally inconsistent? Sure. But like we've mentioned, even those scenes that are tonally inconsistent, they really work, because that scene at the end, that's a horror scene. That's straight out of Saw. I mean, Jesus, it's more graphic than Saw is in a lot of ways. Like, it's pretty graphic for a drama, but yet here's this weird injection of kind of horror when there's an injection of comedy about, 45 minutes earlier. And like you said, that hanging scene is hilarious. I don't know if it should be, but it works in spite of what it is.
At a certain point, and that scene is that certain point when at least with these two women, all the cards are on the table, the narrative becomes rather streamlined because now our concerns have narrowed to basically, will their love survive?
Right.
If you want to boil it down. And there's a lot of tension. I mean, I got to tell you, as a book collector, when they and when Soo-ki sort of initiates the destruction of this man's beautifully, meticulously curated library of pornography, but still they're books. All right. It was,
of smut. It was emotional. Dirty smut.
And she's ripping them up and splashing paint across them and shredding them and then kicking them into a pool of water and then pouring blood and red ink. I guess it was red ink and black ink all over it. And they're both now destroying these books. It's a scary scene, but there's also exhilaration to it because, again, it's a visual representation of them reclaiming some ownership of their sexuality and their inner lives and their, sort of their own agency. They're certainly now striking out on their own, for better or worse.
And that's a moment where you, as an audience, think, well, wait, 45 minutes ago, I saw Soo-ki being institutionalized and Hideko running off with the Count. What did I actually see? And you start to realize there are scenes that were left out of part one and key information that was withheld from us. And now we start.
What was really happening when Soo-ki was apparently being sent off to an insane asylum?
Well, that's what we find out about in part 3, which kind of, at least initially, sort of takes the perspective of the Count, and we see his backstory kind of through a conversation with Hideko. And it's at this moment that she finds out that he actually kind of told people at the hospital just to kind of kill Soo-ki.
Yeah, she won't be around for long.
She wouldn't want to live there. Trust me, I know what she would want. Because of course he knows exactly what women would want.
But here's my question. At the end of part 1, it looks as if Lady Hideko and the Count have actually conspired against Soo-ki.
Right.
Then at the end of that, then it's sort of, but which is shocking because at first it seems like it's the Count and Soo-ki against Lady Hideko. Then it becomes Lady Hideko and the Count against Soo-ki. And then I'm wondering if we are to believe that what really happened in that moment, it was Hideko and Soo-ki against the Count.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's like the Diabolique twist, but it doesn't. The movie doesn't have the ending.
It's a double cross.
Well,
triple it doesn't have the ending. Okay. Doesn't have the ending of Diabolique.
So, hang on to your hats, everyone. Who planned the fire at the insane asylum?
That I actually don't know.
Okay, because there's a world in which that was Hideko and Soo-ki's plan. Go ahead, pretend to have me locked up, go off with him, you take care of him, I'll get my childhood compatriots in the House of Thieves where I grew up, we'll get me out of there, and then I'll meet you at the pre-elected rendezvous kind of plan, right? I mean, that's essentially where we go with this, right?
And speaking of another funny scene where they're getting her out as a firefighter, one of the women just dumps a can of water on their own head. They're running out. I mean, it's hilarious. That's probably how they stayed cool. And like, I just thought it was hilarious because like she's just like they're running. It's like I just assume it was like they're just trying to show they're bad firefighters and they don't care.
It's such an odd scene because the structure appears to be built primarily of brick. So I'm not sure what was burning and how it created a problem for anyone. But then they put on these sort of lacquered leathers, I guess. I mean, I guess this is sort of like, hey, guys, here's how we fought fires back in the day. Aren't you glad you have better equipment now? But it's played almost comical. Like they're not trying to make you believe in any of this. And we meet the kid who's got the stutter, And thank God they gave him a stutter 2 hours and 15 minutes ago. So we recognize him now. And we're like, oh, that's the guy. He's a friend of Suki. And they're sort of being very obvious about the fact where they're putting a gas mask on her and then running her out. And it's sort of, again, almost an oddly slapstick sort of moment that tells us, oh, don't worry, folks. She was never in any danger. Everything has been thought of.
That's what I was saying. The thing with the bucket of water, like I thought it was comical, like Little Rascals level of like, look at them. They're just trying to get their friend out. They're just putting on airs. That's what I was thinking.
Yes. It does not feel like Mission Impossible.
No.
This feels like,
even though they mentioned like she might die here, like
right.
The accountant's like, she's going to die there. And then like next scene, it's like they're breaking her out of this fucking Hogan's Heroes level prison where it's like they can just walk in and out at free will.
In that moment, they don't want you, the filmmakers don't want you to worry that, oh, wait, is she going to die in a fire? It's like, no, we're going to crank up the tension. We do want you to be concerned about the fate of this relationship, but not right now. We want to get her out of that plot contrivance and into a whole new one. And that's the one we would like you to be more concerned with. And the greatest moment of tension in that story plays out in a train station with a ticketing clerk. And if you're the kind of traveler I am, this was a very effective and stressful scene.
Oh my God.
But we're skipping over the whole point with the whole plot point of how do you get the revenge on the Count?
Dose his ass with poison, knock him out, and leave him.
Why is there poison in our narrative? How is it introduced?
Well, because earlier, this is a nice little moment of dramatic irony and like a nice payoff. The Count gave Hideko a vial of liquid opium saying like, oh, if your uncle ever, comes after you, just, 3 drops, you can sleep, drink the whole thing if you just want to die. So now she has decided to spike. She has 2 glasses of wine. One of them she spikes with 3 drops for him, and the other is for herself, unspiked. She goes into his room, and it's like, oh, yeah, you can finally have sex with me, And he's like, nah, you don't want it. And so she starts drinking the wine, trying to convince him, like, oh, you should get in the mood. And he just doesn't want to. So she has to start seducing him, and he won't drink the wine. So she starts drinking it and spitting it into his mouth. And I was so concerned that she was going to accidentally swallow it. And her plan works. He winds up passing out.
It's such a great scene because you're watching one of the oldest gags in the book. They make fun of it in Princess Bride. It's like, who's switching the glasses?
Yeah.
You're looking at 2 identical glasses. One of them has poison. And you're so into it. You're just like, wait, is she drinking the right one? Why isn't he drinking his? What's happening? How is she going to make him drink that? And just as you're articulating the thought in your head, you see her start to drink his, and you're like, oh no, this is going really wrong. And then she does like the fucking frat party, Tijuana, whatever that tawdry strip club, sexual, I'm going to take a sip of alcohol. And then the erotic move is, I'm going to kiss you and push it into your mouth. And it's so great.
Sounds so fucking gross, though.
And again, it's hilarious. It's like this
because of how gross it is, because of how absolutely stomach turning it is.
This is like, in a way, one of the most dramatic moments in the story thus far, because like everything on their plan hinges on this going correctly.
Right.
And he's injecting humor into it. It's unexpected and it works.
Well, and not only that, but because the premise of the scene is, well, I'm not going to have sex with you because you're not into it. And so she uses sex against him. Really. Yeah. That's what it is. It's like, that I'm going to do the most tawdry, sort of college level. I'm going to do this and spit it in your mouth to prove how hot to trot I am. And you're going to literally swallow the bait. I mean, again, this could be discussed. 5,000 papers can be written on this scene about who's swallowing, who we hope doesn't swallow, the implications of swallowing, and how it buys her freedom. He attempts to, let's say, consummate the relationship, but the drugs kick in literally just in time. We're getting insert shots, if you will, of a watch, and he collapses to the floor.
And then he's taken back to the uncle.
Well, he wakes up in the room first with no pants. And two guys standing over him with samurai swords. Going, hey, buddy. And he's like, can I get my pants on at least? Again, like a bit of comedy in a otherwise serious scene, because what follows is pretty grotesque. The uncle starts chopping the Count's fingers off using his bookmaking tools.
Okay, so the Count is brought into the basement. Now, the basement in this movie is hell. This is the place you don't want to go. What was the room in 1984? Room 313 or whatever it was. What was the room number in The Shining? 214?
Room 247 or 243. No.
Well, whatever the scary room is that you never want to go into, the basement is that room in this narrative. So much so that the Count, the very poison we're talking about, is given to Hideko if she's ever told she's being taken to the basement. If he ever tries to take you to the basement, she's like, I'm never going to that basement ever again. And he says, here's some opium in this little vial. If he ever tries to take you to the basement, drink this stuff. Okay. So, wow, what a guy. Opium's used on him. Awesome. Now he's brought to the basement and we see the tank that is literally overstuffed with a giant octopus.
Oh, it is a moment of horror that is not, there's no lantern hung on it. They don't even mention it. They don't even fucking address it. It's just over the uncle's shoulder, the entire scene, wriggling and writhing and pulsating and kind of slopping around. If you watch Stranger Things season 4 with the subtitles on, tentacle squelching noise, that's what you're getting in the scene. Just tons of like, and it is. But like you said, Richard, I thought it was a bunch of them in a tank. It's more horrifying to think that there's just this giant octopus thing in this tank. Much more horrifying. But again, this movie is playing with heightened realism, right? It's like fantastical realism.
So, okay.
Right.
So, yeah, there definitely are elevated moments, but so let's talk about this, Reagan. So now the uncle is torturing the Count. I'm got more spoilers. He's literally cutting his fingers off one by one, but part of it, I assume, is punishment for being involved in a con game against him. But
he's saying the names of the books that have been destroyed each time. He's like, I'm going to cut off one finger for each of my favorite books that was destroyed because of you. And so he's like naming them, and then he's slicing his fingers off one at a time.
But he's not asking. It's not Marathon Man. It's not. Is it safe?
No, it's like you did this already.
It isn't give me the combination to the safe that contains the bearer bonds. What the information that he wants is another fucking sex story. What was it like having sex with my niece? That's what he is doing. That's the information he's trying to extract. Ultimately, tell me one last sex story.
Tell me the most tawdry thing you know.
If you didn't think the uncle could be any more despicable and horrendous of a human being, he got even lower.
He ends at his absolute lowest point.
Yes. And so what does the Count do to get out of this?
Go ahead, Cullen.
Well, he has that cigarette case that he's been smoking from throughout this journey that he's been captured. And now he begins to smoke from the other side, and they have a different color paper on them. And as it turns out, they are drugged.
Yep.
With mercury. Now, here's my question to you guys, quite legit. Was this set up? Was this a payoff in any way? Or is it just like, oh, I guess he always carried around some poison cigarettes with him? Okay.
I guess it was. So my perception of it was, because I watched the movie twice, I didn't remember them setting it up. My perception was that was like his out if he ever got in a position where this is it, right? It's like the cracking of the tooth as a spy thing.
The closest you come is you see him put drips of opium in the tobacco.
Right, but that's it. You never see the mercury cigarettes. You never see blue cigarette. He never, and that's the thing. Like in an American movie, it would be like he's making them, and like he mentions to someone that he has. Like that would be an American movie, right? And this, it's like, just give me those blue cigarettes, please.
Right, or you could do a thing where he has another opium vial, because we know he at least had one of them. If he had a second one in his cigarette case, and he opens that, and then instead of taking a cigarette, he just takes the entire vial and crunches on it and swallows it. In other words, does the very thing he so casually suggested to Hideko. It might feel a bit more like ironic payoff. But the cigarettes, well, I loved the fact that it worked and it happened. And
it takes them both out.
Spoiler alert, they both die. Both male characters die at the end, horribly.
And what is the last thing that he said, the Count says? Say, at least I die with my dick.
At least I died with my cock, yeah. Because the uncle was going to cut his dick off.
Yep.
He had cut his underwear off, and then he's like, give me one more cigarette. It's like, oh, yeah, by the way, this is mercury in its most dangerous form and gaseous form, you motherfucker. Have fun.
But I like how the character, even in this moment of triumph, because, he's always acting out his own narrative in which he is, the smart one. He just says the shallowest but most perfectly revealing thing.
Yeah.
It's not like at least I took you down. At least I don't go down alone. It's like at least I still got my penis.
I didn't die with honor, or I did something good with my life. I died with my dick attached to my body. That's the most I can say as I slump to the floor.
Which I think cuts to the core of that character almost entirely. Yeah. And I think it, like you've mentioned, Richard, if we're going to have an English class discussion about it, what does that mean at the end of the movie? And also, what does it mean that one of the female characters has to masquerade as a man to escape?
Okay. So let's talk about that.
Because again, it's like there's a emasculation and a defeminization almost in back-to-back scenes, a almost demasculation.
Before we get to that, there is one piece of information, though, that the uncle says to the Count, which is, I made it impossible for any two women to leave. And then while they're at the station, you see someone going around lifting up all the hats of the people. And it's just like the uncle still is, up to his old tricks trying to control these two.
Well, we didn't even mention that this entire scene, they're at the train station while the uncle is torturing the Count in this perfect cut back and forth. And you have the narration of the uncle cutting his fingers off while they're just in the scene. There's a moment where it's like, he says, they're not going to escape. And you see, it's like this perfect audio cue of him being like, just 3 yen and you're free to go. And it's like, your best laid plans even then fucked up, old man.
So I'm going to get an A+ on my sophomore English paper when I say that the uncle's tentacles reach all the way out, all the way to the train station, where you fear they will grab onto our two heroes or heroines. And I will also point out the metaphorical emasculation of the Count as his fingers are chopped off.
Right. If
we look at them as phallic symbols, we can see, and yet, and I thought this was one of the things we were going to say, was that the uncle dies in a state of sexual frustration.
Yeah, completely.
He wants those details, and instead the guy says, fuck you, fuck your questions, and you're inhaling mercury. I'm not going to feed your final perverse sexual fantasy by telling you anything about your niece and my wedding night with her, which wasn't even a legitimate wedding night.
What he's still lying. He
doesn't even have the information the uncle wants anyways, which is the best part. It's like, tell me about that night. And he's like, it was amazing. And that's all he says. It's like, of course it was amazing, because you didn't get anything. You didn't deserve anything. And she got all she wanted. So fuck yourself.
So what did she do? Because we had a character who overheard their wedding night, and it sure sounded like they were having sex, and that someone was having a pretty good climax. What was really happening?
Hideko was masturbating. She was getting herself off.
Right.
And he sat and watched.
He sat and watched. totally emasculated, and then to prove to the whoever the maids were the next morning, she had to she actually cut her hand and let some blood drip onto the sheet, so it looked as if her virginity had been taken on her wedding night.
Right.
So even on that level, I guess the Count was emasculated.
And and again, Richard, English level, English school or class question. Does the red paint in the scene where they're destroying the books tie back into the red blood on the bed at the end of the movie? I would think it does, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Oh,
and that's like surface level-y stuff, right? But I know, like that's what I love about these
it's in the
movies.
movie.
Right. Yeah, that's what I love about these kinds of movies is we don't watch these kinds of movies often on this show, but when we do, it's like, Jesus Christ, why don't we watch these kinds of things more often?
What do you mean with these kinds of things?
Like contemporary period pieces done right. I tend to stay away from period pieces like this, especially stuff set in the Victorian era. I tend to.
You should do a period piece month.
Victorian era only. All of Helen Mirren's roles in all of those fucking films where she plays the queen. Do that.
So let's talk about the ending now. So as we've said, one of them, Lady Hideko, disguises herself with Suki's help as a man. Word has gone out. Any two women traveling together, stop them. But the ruse works. They manage to get their tickets, and they take an ocean liner, and they ultimately get to again enjoy each other romantically, sexually. What we and now I will say what we have not talked about in this movie, which is a big factor of the movie, is the rather explicit sex scenes between the two women.
Graphic lesbian sex scenes. So if you read the reviews, some people felt that they were rather kind of not anything to get excited about. Not done rather well is what I read. And then some people are like, it was part of the story. I think that they were a crucial part of the story. I don't think they needed to be exploitative and kind of feather rustling. I think they're done rather well, especially the final scene, which I love the lingering on the Benoit balls. I like that they come back. What do the Benoit balls mean, Richard? They're balls, and but again, they show up earlier in the movie with the uncle because he's sticking them in the women's mouths. He's like, taste this. And then they come back at the end of the movie where the women are using them on themselves for their own pleasure because they're Benoit balls, better known in the States as Kegel balls, which you use to exercise the muscles in your vagina. So your Kegel muscles. So, but it's another emasculation, a further emasculation of all the male characters in the movie. Cause then they're like, here are your balls. And you know what? Fuck your balls.
And a reclaiming of their own sexual joy separate and apart from any male on the scene. I heard that there were, some complaints are that if you're showing two women, naked and, having sex with each other, that it is, first it has to be seen as exploitative, and it has to be seen as if it's being done to entertain the male gaze in the audience. So, and it's not that they didn't. I mean, they did. These two beautiful actresses, and I thought it was beautifully shot, and they're obviously sexually aroused, and you're watching these scenes, and so my question has to be, considering what the actual point of the narrative is, was any part of this supposed to call attention to the male viewer and make them become super conscious of the way they were experiencing this? Look, it's a movie where you see men that you do not like getting off on pornography, and then within this same narrative, erotic images are being presented to you to enjoy or not enjoy, depending on what you're going to do about it. So, what was the point? What do you think? What were we supposed to take from it?
One thing I think that's important to point out is that the first two sex scenes in the film, which are just two different perspectives of the same encounter between Hideko and Suki, those are both fictional narratives. Like they're enacting, a male drama. He has created this scene to happen between the two of them.
What do you mean? Wait, I'm confused.
That's the director's intent.
Well, no, because that's the scene where the Count has basically sort of created these characters for each of them to play, and has sort of given them separate directions so they don't know what the other one knows. So they're basically enacting his erotic drama that he has created.
Right. And they talk about him because the context of this sexual encounter is Lady Hideko saying, I'm going to be expected on the wedding night to perform sexually for this guy, and I don't know what to do. And she invites Suki into her bed, and they have this intimate conversation. And then it turns into something which I guess in cinema is sort of a male construct of, when women are together, they practice sex. They practice heterosexual sex on each other to be prepared for when they finally have a heterosexual encounter with a man. Right. So that's already a trope and a fantasy. And now that is what's playing out here. And it's like, what else would he do to me? Well, he would touch you here. What else would he do to me? So you're right. They are enacting a narrative that has been set in motion by the Count.
And as someone who can speak to these kinds of things, I won't say how, but I just trust that I can in a lot of ways. It's not anything. Look, sex between a man and a woman and sex between two women or two men, it's all shockingly boring because it is just still sex between people. You know what I mean? Like getting off on the fact it's two women, that is a male construct. Like, oh my God. But it's more of a, like, I'm imagining this for the sake of myself, not because two other people are enjoying it. And that's my problem. Like you said, Richard, they're playing out two roles and the Count is not expecting either one of them to actually genuinely enjoy it. Like you said, there's no way they could actually enjoy it. That idea never enters his mind that the two of them together might actually, there could be something there. He never even thinks about that.
Well, now, wait a second. Wait, I'm confused because I never got the impression that the Count expected the two of them to become sexually involved.
No, he didn't.
The Count is completely ignorant of that. Now, the fact that they are still playing roles that he took part in is sort of separate and apart from him. So his influence is in the scene because they have not admitted to each other,
right,
who they are.
It's a double blind in the scene.
Yeah. Exactly. Which is why I think the sex scene at the end is so important because now we're seeing the two of them as the two of them enjoying themselves and each other without the artifice of a con game, a crime, a feeling that they're being put into on the one hand a relationship they don't want. And so now this is like they are finally, living their best life.
They're finally naked in front of each other.
Exactly. In every way you can be. And for the audience, aside from any enjoyment we're getting visually from two beautiful people making love, is we're getting the legitimate emotions of human beings, and the highest of those of love and devotion. They win out in this narrative, and here we are seeing that, and we are also seeing its sexual expression because that is an element which was being smothered and snuffed out in all earlier versions.
And I think, honestly, I think we would all agree there should be more normalizing of homosexual love in same-sex love in movies. Why exploit it? What is the point? Like we're part of the community like everybody else. I don't like or feel it necessary to exploit my sexuality or my brothers and sisters' sexuality, brothers and sisters of the community. It's their sexuality for the yucks, and that's again, at the end of the movie, I don't perceive it as being done for the yucks. I see it being done as for a serious final moment of expression between the two characters. That's not to say that I don't think Park-chan-wook's not funny at the end of the movie when you get this shot and they kind of pull out from the boat and you just see the boat and you see the night sky and you can hear the slight tinkling in the background from the Benoit balls. And you can hear the little bells tinkling in the background. It's there. It's very quiet, but it's funny. And if you have the subtitles on, it's like bells jingling. And it's like, why are those bells jingling? I thought that was funny. Again, it's like we've mentioned, there is kind of this sly injection of humor throughout the movie. And even in the final scene, it's like right there, because that's intentional. I mean, there's a little subtitle that says bells jingling. Like he's intending to be a little tongue in cheek even at the end of the movie, which I appreciate.
So you get the victory of a genuine loving relationship, and you also get the victory, the female feminine victory over an oppressive male society, and that can be done in a story of two women who are in love in an era when that was certainly not going to be embraced by society, but also women being also oppressed individually and as a sex by society. So my question is to you guys, and I don't know if I have an answer, is there a movie that in the same way celebrates a male sexual romantic relationship as graphically as this one does, but in a way that also is constructed to really elicit audience sympathy, support, and a relationship you're rooting for, having also seen graphic scenes of sexual interaction between two men? And is a movie like that even possible?
Is that movie Brokeback Mountain, and have any of us seen Brokeback Mountain?
I saw it in theaters.
Is it Brokeback? I've never seen Brokeback Mountain. Is it Brokeback Mountain?
It's
not? Okay. No. Well, I was asking because, again, I don't know if you had seen it or not, Richard. So I didn't know if you were talking in the context of Brokeback Mountain existing or having not seen it. So I didn't know.
I saw it, and it was not visually graphic, although there were scenes where it was obvious they were having sex, but it's also a tragedy,
Right.
So I guess we do root for it because we do see it as a relationship that deserves a shot.
But why are gay relationships tragic? Why do gay relationships have to be tragic?
I don't know. I mean, this one was. I don't know if every movie.
I mean, there are a lot of them that are Philadelphia. I mean, there's a lot of movies with gay narratives where there are, Boys Don't Cry.
Okay, so here's my question. I'll just lay it out. In our society, for what our society is, especially in America, if you witnessed explicit sex between two men, would you still be rooting for those characters? Or is that the ultimate taboo in a certain way? And would that alienate an audience rather than draw an audience in?
Depends on what audience. I have been led to believe, if you look at the statistics with the data, that it's like 70 or 80% of the people in this country are accepting of the LGBTQIA plus community or consider themselves allies. Is that a rather large number, a rather large percentage? Sure. Should it be that high? It should be as close to 100% as possible. You're never going to get everybody, but there are always going to be outliers who are terrible human beings who can't get on board. But that number is like 70 or 80%. So I would think now in 2022, where the dialogue is what it is, where we have companies openly celebrating pride for whatever the fuck value there is for that. Commoditize the gays, everybody. They did it now companies are getting in on it with marijuana and 420, where it's like, hey, Uber Eats, everybody, order your weed food on 420. It's like 10 years ago, nobody in their fucking right mind would have done that. But right. Now it's the same thing with pride. So I think, as cynical as I am about society as a whole with their kind of acceptance of the gay community as a whole, I think society's gotten a lot better. So I would like to believe, yes, in this day and age, yes.
Okay. Now we're 2.5 straight guys, which should be the name of the podcast. Talking about, in other words, what we don't have. Chiming in about a personal, emotional, visceral reaction to these two women having sex on screen. We don't have a straight woman, and we don't have a gay woman, and we don't have a bisexual woman. So those are right off the bat 3 voices that could tell us how they felt seeing that. And I think they would have opinions we couldn't even begin to anticipate, and that would be really interesting. And then those same points of view, looking at images. In other words, I honestly don't know, and I would not even be able to generalize what women or straight women or gay women think of when they see male homosexual relationships rendered graphically, but beautifully, I would say, if this was the same director, in other words, telling the same story, but with guys. In other words, are they responding like, oh, that's really hot? Are some of them, none of them? Is there any generalization to be made? These are questions we can't answer, because I'm only saying I'm not seeing movies where that's being portrayed, but this movie portrayed their relationship in a way that I don't think had people burning down their theaters.
No, I think you're right. Honestly, Richard, I'm not even sure you can make a generalization. I think it's some women probably find it hot. Some women don't, some women find women on women hot. Some women don't. It's just like, all women don't find other women being intimate with other women attractive.
So, okay. So a choice was made to go graphic.
Right.
Now I'm curious, because I don't really know a lot about Korean cinema. I don't know what's considered, over the line, under the line.
Have you seen the film Old Boy?
I've not.
That's a Korean film.
Same director. It's a pretty fucking intense movie. Korean film is pretty intense.
Was it sexually or violence-wise?
Violence, sexually, all of it. I'm trying to remember what's the other. Have you ever seen I Saw the Devil? That's another. They're pretty Korean films. They're all over the place, like any other film genre, but they do not stay away or stray away from stuff like this.
So this
violence.
is more shocking to a Western audience than a Korean audience.
Probably. That's kind of my take on it, at least.
I've never seen an American movie with this level of sexual content. I mean, and again, it was put across extremely tastefully, extremely, it didn't.
It's not salacious.
Like Porky's.
Yeah. Nobody's trying to get anybody's jollies off. This is not tittillating.
See, that's what I expected from just the hubbub about this movie, was how shocking it is. And the first time I watched it, I kept expecting more shocking things, and I didn't get that. And I think watching it a second time was a much better experience, not only to appreciate the fantastic construction of the story and the editing, and really the nuances in the acting. Like, once you sort of know what the motivations are in each of the perspectives, to see little details. It's an incredibly made movie from all aspects, but to not have that sort of expectation of shock hanging over the eroticism, it plays, really beautifully filmed.
Well, that's the thing. I went into it not knowing any of the kind of, this is a tawdry film that's very shocking with its sexual presentation of a gay relationship. I didn't know any of that. So when I went into it, I was, okay. I mean, these two women are, expressing their love for one another, forced kind of, sort of, to begin with. And then at the end, it's a genuine expression of love. Maybe I wasn't that shocked. I don't know.
Well, and again, were the critical voices saying that this is shocking and salacious? Were those Western voices? In other words,
we're not saying it's shocking or salacious.
I'm not saying it's. I don't think it is.
No. But that's my question. In other words, in Korea, was this received as groundbreaking, or was it like, oh yeah, that's another film with normal levels of sex?
So I can't speak to the sex reception, but I can speak to the movie's reception. It was well received. The entire film was in Korea. So that's, again, my perception of Western culture, at least American culture, is we're a bunch of fucking prudes. Not us, not the three of us, not a lot of people that we know, but the main body politic of our country are prudes who like violence and would rather think about violence than sex, because look at our culture, and good God in heaven, everybody's repressed all the time.
I would agree, especially with movies today. They're more violent than ever and less sexual. Yeah,
especially, oh my God, gay sex. This movie would be rated X, NC-17. Take it and throw it in a safe somewhere and don't let anybody see it. Right? I mean, this film's not yet rated talks all about what happens when your movie's X or NC-17 and how you cannot show it in a movie theater anywhere other than like an art house theater in LA or New York. I think our country is remarkably prude and remarkably naive about the rest of the world's sexuality and how open and free everybody else is and how goddamn fucking prude we are here. And when you talk about movies like this shouldn't be that big of a deal anymore.
Right.
If you know what I mean, like this shouldn't be that big of a deal. But yet you have American critics talking about how explicit the sexuality is. It's like, shut the fuck up, frankly.
Well, okay, yeah. I mean, if your ultimate point is that America's fucked up, I think we can agree with you.
Well, no, I'm not. That's not it. It's more just in regards to the sexuality and the way we view sexuality through media. I really don't appreciate the way this country treats sexuality because we treat it like the thing we can't talk about. We can't talk about it at all. We can't have an open and honest, frank conversation about sex at all, which bleeds in, which like an octopus infects everything in our culture.
I'll say, well, I'll say something else is that this isn't a sort of, an eroticization of the female form by a male director for prurient reasons alone. In other words, it's not two women experimenting with, homosexuality or doing it to, for reasons other than those that are revealed, which is an actual attraction and affection for each other. So what we're seeing isn't just like, oh, here's an actress wearing a skimpy dress in a
cue the music.
Right. While we photograph her from the feet slowly up the body, it's like, well, no, what we're seeing is a nascent relationship forming, and will they find their ways out of either the lies that they're being sort of forced into by the men in their lives, or the trauma that they've been forced into by the men in their lives, and will through sexuality, through affection, through kindness and friendship, will they find a way to sort of navigate their way out of all of that, the grasp of the octopus, and make it free. And I was happy to see that they did. The message of the movie was these two characters made it.
Yeah. And hey, I honestly appreciate a film like this that ends on a positive note.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
I was kind of worried. I was like, oh no, like, is this going to end on a bummer? But no, it doesn't, thankfully.
I want to read the novel now. I'm just very curious.
From what I could tell, skimming the synopsis, it's very different.
Oh, really? Oh, I just thought it was exactly the same. It seems
different. There were some things I was reading. I was like, this doesn't track 1-to-1, which is not surprising given that this is a 2.5-hour movie and that's a 300-page book. So. Okay. So, Richard, final thoughts on The Handmaiden?
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, if you've listened to the podcast, you certainly know what you're in for in terms of content, but also the tone through which the content is delivered. So if that doesn't make the movie a non-starter for you, and I would be sad if it did make it a non-starter for you, I would definitely recommend it. However, I would also recommend, if you're like me, go to the Cliff Notes, go to Wikipedia, and read the plot description of part 1, and then start watching on your Prime Video. And then at the end of part 1, hit pause, and then read the paragraph or two about part 2, and then watch that. And then same thing with part 3. Yeah, it might give a few things away, but it's better. Unless you're really, really great at watching subtitled movies, it helps you, I think, get more out of it. Does anyone agree or disagree with that?
I sometimes have a hard time keeping track in subtitled movies of the characters and stuff. So yes, I am a huge proponent of, especially with some foreign films, you need to go to Wikipedia and kind of inform yourself because sometimes it's hard. Sometimes they don't say the characters' names very often. You don't even know who the characters' names are. And that's a problem, obviously, for Western audiences.
I live in Los Angeles. I've, got a lot of friends. I see a lot of plays. I've seen more than my share of Shakespeare. I don't consider myself a big Shakespeare fan or an expert. And anytime I go to see a play, I have to go and read the entire synopsis of every scene with every character before I see the play, so that I'm like, because I will get lost and the Shakespearean language will lose me.
Right. And I'm the same way with a lot of foreign film as well. And Mike White, we've talked about it before. Sometimes they're just hard to follow, and it's not the filmmaker's intention. It's not even the filmmaker's fault. It's just we are Western audiences, and sometimes there are just things lost in translation that we can't make up for. Is what it is. And like you said, looking at subtitles, there's a difference between subtitles on an English film where it's just reinforcing what you're hearing, or having to read and watch the scene. And if you're not able to keep up with it, sometimes it's a pain in the ass. I get it. And sometimes you lose something in the process. So Cullen, what about you? Final thoughts on The Handmaiden?
Well, I hope anyone listening has already paused the podcast to watch the movie. And now I hope they watch it a second time. It's a great pick, Jess. It's a fantastic film.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I agree. It was a lot of fun. It was a good movie. Again, this is probably, I think, my second or third Korean film. Third, I think I've seen The Host, this, and I Saw the Devil. They're all great. Korean films are, again, another area of the world I would love to get more into.
Ooh, I can give you some recommendations. There's
a lot
lots
of
great
ones, right?
stuff.
Oh yeah.
Thankfully, a lot of them come to New York. So you get to see them.
Right. I mean, and again, the movie just entertaining and involving on a story level. You're watching a mystery. You're watching conflicting agendas play out against each other. If you like that kind of film and that kind of storytelling, you'll definitely enjoy this. Yes, there are some dark elements, but it's a compelling narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not one that I think I don't think you need to have cultural reference points either. I think it's a rather universal story as well, which helps, especially for, again, budding Western audiences who maybe don't watch a lot of subtitled films. So this is easy to find. It's on Prime Video. It's free. You should go watch it right now. So, and again, a lot of American Western audience have seen Parasite. So this is kind of in the same vein as Parasite in a lot of ways. It kind of speaks to a lot of similar things. So yeah. So on that note, let's take a break and we'll play a preview for the first Culture Cast of July.
Now, tell me, how'd you make money?
I knock people down.
You mean like a prize fighter?
No, they're pickup fights. The money's made on bets.
What does it feel like to knock somebody down?
It makes me feel a hell of a lot better than it does him.
1933. America had hit the skids. People were out of work and out of luck.
Third refill costs a nickel.
Life was as tough as a cheap steak.
Suppose you've been down the long, hard road.
Who hasn't?
It was hard times.
I got a husband in jail, no job, and no prospects.
I don't look past the next bend in the road.
A man had to live by his wits.
Well, my man's just starting out. He's good, but I'd get long odds.
What kind of odds you talking about?
5 to 1.
3 to 1.
D.
Or by his fists. Columbia Pictures presents Hard Times, starring Charles Bronson as Cheney, a drifter.
When I get enough change in my pocket, I'm going.
A loner.
Are you going to stay the night?
Not this time.
A man who spoke soft.
I barely know you.
Yeah, but would you like to?
And hit hard. James Coburn as Speed, a born con man.
50-50 on all scratch bets and expenses. All side bets, I keep 75%. That's how it works.
Who can make a fortune in a day.
I propose a toast to the best man I know. Me.
And lose it in a minute.
I'm flat broke. I need some money fast. What the hell are you doing?
You don't want no trouble. Just you pay your debts.
Speed was the hustler.
It was too damned easy. There ain't no rules about that, except who wins.
Cheney was the hitter.
You ever get scared when you do work?
I don't think about it.
Together, they just couldn't be beat.
You give us our damn money now. You want that money? Take it.
Now I got the gun.
I don't think you want to use it.
That's one way. You want to see another?
Charles Bronson, James Coburn, Jill Ireland, and Strother Martin. They're a knockout. In Hard Times.
So the first Culture Cast of July is a Charles Bronson movie, because shockingly, we programmed an entire month of Charles Bronson movies. By we, I mean Cullen and Richard did. And to kick off the month, we're going to be talking about Hard Times with Charles Bronson. Who else? I do not know. I don't even know what the movie's about. I just know Charles Bronson's in it because that was the singular requirement was it's a Charles Bronson movie. So I'll be joined by Cullen and Richard on that episode. Until then, Richard, where can people find you when you're not here?
They can find me as the frequent writer and always executive producer of Titans on HBO Max. Seasons 1, 2, and 3 are available now, and season 4 premieres in August, which I realize now is like right around the corner. Boy, I better get to work. We've got to get that film developed.
Right. Come on, get on down there, Richard. It's your job. What about you, Cullen? Where can people find you?
Been working on new music, so if, I believe hopefully by the end of the summer, I should have 5 albums out. So if you just follow CullenGallagher.com, there will be updates about the new music projects.
And as for me, cstachiw.com, cstachiw.com. That's my link tree. Go there. All the things I work on. Richard and I do a podcast together with our friend Mike White, Rankin' on Bass. It's the bane of Richard's existence. So if you go and give it a listen, Richard will enjoy that you have listened and interacted with us. Now, Richard loves it. Come on. I know the truth, Richard. Who doesn't love talking about random live action films from the late 70s and early 80s? Not us.
You've truly proven we can talk extensively about anything.
Literally fucking anything. And yeah, so that's where you can find the stuff that I work on, including a Columbo podcast that Cullen does the music for. So that's a thing as well. If you should, if you're into Columbo, which if you're not, you should be. So that's where you can go for my stuff, culturecast.com, patreon.com/culturecast. Money if you want to kick it my way. If not, hey, inflation sucks. Shit's hard. I get it. Richard, Cullen, thank you both so much for joining me, especially for a movie that's pretty far from the kind of stuff we normally watch together. So, which is good.
It really is, but I was so glad that it was so good. And now we all got to put on our Charles Bronson goggles. And I'm excited because I don't think I've seen any of the ones we're talking about. So, yeah, join us next week. I can't wait.